multiple people were confused about. You listed the 1.5% investment rate. What are you referring to?
So if you go on, if you try and buy a long-term 30-year Treasury bond right now, they're yielding, it's probably about 1.34% today, but in general, they've been around 1.5% in recent months in terms of what the interest rate is over the 30 years. So it's a 30-year Treasury bond, and the yield is around 1.5%. So that's the safe security right now, the safe nominal security. And that's what we're using as the default return assumption in Maxify. You can change that by clicking on settings and assumptions, but that's what we're using in these. That's what I'm using in these calculations.
Okay. Yeah, and I guess just to add on to that quickly, one questioner, Ben, says, is the 1.5% rate people should be using for the rate differential? Because he says, I've used the 6% historical market return to determine whether it's worth paying down the mortgage or investing.
Yeah, so this gentleman's name is Ben?
Yeah.
All right, so Ben, here's the thing. The 6% return might be a return that you could get on the stock market investing in a risky manner. Indeed, the stock market, adjusted for inflation, has yielded about 6.5% going back to 29. But there's a lot of risk. We've seen, in between 29 and 33, the stock market dropped 86%. It didn't recover until I think 1956 in terms of the value of the market being, the S&P being back to where it was in 29. We saw in 2000 it dropped over 50%, the S&P over the next 2 years from 2000 to 2002. In 2008 to 2009, it dropped again by more than 50%. And we saw it drop earlier this year by about 34%. It has recovered, but it could certainly drop again. It's a very risky game. You cannot count on it. So what Maxify does have, you can run Maxify, it can run its Monte Carlo risk analysis report, and you'll see how your living standard will fare, the upsides and the downsides to your living standard based on how you're investing. But if you're not running that, if you're not telling the program that you're investing at risk, then you really need to run it assuming you're investing safely. And the safe rate of return right now is 1.5%. And the fact that that number is so low compared to what it was historically is testimony to how much risk there is in the market. So you can't just assume that you're going to get 6% safely when the market is saying you're only going to get 1.5%. If you could do that, you could become a billionaire. You could basically say, look, everybody give me your money. I can invest it at 6%. I'm going to take a margin here, so I'm going to pay you back 4%. Everybody would invest with you, and nobody would invest in treasury bonds, and you would make a killing. But you can't guarantee that because there's too much risk. But anyway, next question, Alex.
Okay, so just more sort of general questions that people are asking here. And this gentleman, Larry, sort of summarizes this, I think, well. He says there's more to home ownership expense than just the mortgage. For example, property tax, repairs, maintenance. Rent does not have these additional expenses. How does the program take this into account? And a lot of people have been asking about how or whether the program can evaluate property taxes.
Oh yeah, it does. I'll show you the base case for Joe and Jane right now. So let's just look at their base profile. And under housing, we have entered. I've entered property taxes right here, $7,000 a year, and that's staying fixed in today's dollars. Homeowners insurance, $3,500. Maintenance and condo fee. Well, they don't have a condo, but maintenance, $5,000 a year. And I'm thinking also about utilities in this context. So you enter right here, and then if you're changing homes, you again are asked these questions about the new home that you're going to be buying. So for sure, we're handling these things, and we're looking at whether or not you should be taking the standard deduction or uh, itemizing your deduction as part of, and we're looking at that decision every year for the rest of your life, up through your maximum age of life, uh, in our tax calculations. So property taxes and their impact on the federal income tax and your state income tax, that's fully taken into account. Next
Okay.
question.
I want to ask a series of, I want to repeat a series of questions from a number of people about this idea of pulling money out of one's 401k. Kevin says, he states that you can only withdraw from your 401k without penalty if you have been affected by the pandemic, lost your job, have a wage cut, or have health issues. It's not a general get out of jail free card. Furthermore, the limit is 100K, part of the CARES Act. Is that true?
I think Kevin is correct that there are, restrictions, but I was thinking about, somebody who might have been furloughed, uh, but has enough assets to pay the extra taxes that they'd have to pay. So that a column kind of walks through a couple where the husband got furloughed and the wife still has a job, and they have enough wherewithal to pay the taxes. I also have them actually taking out extra money from the 401k to help pay with the taxes. So I'm with you, Kevin, that there are these restrictions in the CARES Act, but there are, obviously millions of people that are unemployed, and they might be in a position that could actually to do this. You also have people that are over 59 are not facing the penalty whatsoever, and many of them still have mortgages at significant interest rates that they're paying, and they have the potential to, they might be retired, so they might be in a relatively low tax bracket, taking out the money to pay off the mortgage. You get for sure maybe 3.5%, 3.5% if that's your mortgage rate. You can only get 1.5% in the treasury market long term, and that's quite risky because I'll leave that aside. You can earn 3.5% for sure nominal versus 1.5% in the market. And if you said, well, look, I'm going to leave the money in my 401k and invest in the stock market, well, the stock market is a very risky animal and it could go down the tube. So in making that kind of a decision of staying leveraged, not paying off a debt, keeping more money borrowed, and using that additional money to invest in the stock market, what you're really doing is saying, gee, if I had paid off the mortgage, I would actually actively go out and borrow money at a high rate in order to invest in the stock market, which I know is really risky, and that the market really now thinks is highly risky because the safe rate is so low relative to the historic return on the stock market. That's really the calculus that's in effect going on here, that you're leveraging by keeping your mortgage intact and not using your retirement account assets if you can to pay off the mortgage. You're really borrowing to invest in the stock market.
I wanted to add on to that because that gets to there's just a follow-up question that goes into that from Jeff, which is, wouldn't withdrawing $500,000, say, from a 401k account have huge tax implications? He says he needs to account for that because he feels that changes the equation a lot.
Oh, yeah, the program fully takes into account those tax considerations. Let me just see if I can pull up this column here. From Forbes here. When we specify special withdrawals I'll just pull up show you guys, everybody, the column. When we tell the program we're going to have here's the column right here. We tell the program it's going to be a special withdrawal in order to pay, It's going to be a special withdrawal if your retirement account, your IRA or your 401k, if you're retired, if you can get your money out of your 401k, that there are restrictions depending if you're, if you're still working, you may not be able to take withdrawals, but certainly from an IRA. And obviously, if you take money out of a Roth, you don't have to pay taxes whatsoever. But you tell the program, hey, I'm going to take the money out. You go right over here to retirement accounts. Let's see, where is this? Yeah, well, not sure what I did with their retirement accounts, but oh yeah, it's under financial assets, sorry. So if I look here under retirement accounts and I click on edit, there's a field here called special withdrawals. And you can have special withdrawals and say, hey, I'd like to take out this much money this year, for example, like $300,000 to pay off my mortgage. I can start in 2020 and end in 2020, $300,000 put right in here. And yeah, the program is going to know that that's a taxable event. So this article takes into account the taxes, and it still shows that this couple is up about $100,000 in present value in terms of lifetime spending. Now, I didn't know the answer to that before I ran the case. I just said, well, gee, let's check, because a lot of people are out of work and they may be in a relatively low tax bracket, and they may be able to get their money out of their 401k without the 10% penalty. And does it behoove them to do this, even if they have to pay the taxes? And you say, well, you're losing the advantage of the deferral. But given where rates are now, there's no real advantage to 401ks in terms of deferring, getting a high real return and, basically saving, not having to pay taxes, being able to accumulate up that the money you'd otherwise have to hand over to the IRS right now through time at a good positive rate. Well, you can't get a good positive for sure real return on the market anymore. It's actually a negative about 34 basis points real return right now is what inflation index bonds are yielding. They're called TIPS, Treasury Inflation Protected Securities. So there's no deferral advantage. There's actually a deferral disadvantage to 401ks. The only advantage to 401ks right now, or to IRAs and 401ks, tax deferred accounts, is the being able to put your money, take a deduction when you're in a high tax bracket, and then take withdrawals when you're in a low tax bracket. So there's this kind of averaging across brackets advantage to contributing to those retirement accounts. But if somebody's lost their job or if they're already retired, then they're going to be in a relatively low tax bracket now. And this is then the time to consider doing this. So let me go to the next question, Alex.
Yeah, I want to just reiterate. So the typo that I was talking about, and I'm trying to also answer lots of people's questions here virtually, but Jose points out that the error is the market value of the house is $700,000, but you put the purchase price at $7 million in the housing base profile. So just people need to be aware of that. That's an error.
We're going to have that fixed for the when we send out the slides. Here I said 700K house. It must be somewhere else they referred to 7 million. Anyway, when you're making slides at 3 in the morning, you make typos. Sorry about that. Anyway, let's go to the next question.
Okay, let me just try to find a good one here. Yeah, here's one from Stephen. Could you comment on HELOCs or home equity line of credit or a straightforward mortgage refinance with some amount of cash out to unlock equity in a home as opposed to the reverse mortgage?
Yeah, well, I think that a refinance is going to give you a lower rate than a HELOC, and I have to do a little more homework on the HELOC to refresh my brain on its provisions. But if you're taking an equity line of credit, that rate can, if it's a floating rate, the rate you risk the possibility of that going up, and you're getting burned because it's like taking out a variable rate mortgage. You want to, if you're going to refinance, you want to have a fixed rate mortgage because you don't want to risk having to pay a much higher interest rate. If inflation takes off, the interest rates are going to go up, and they could go up dramatically. You know, we had, I'm old enough to remember the 1970s when we had 10% inflation in that range for several years, and we had very high interest rates, and the interest rate stayed quite high for the next decade, even though inflation came down. So I'm not a big fan of HELOCs as a long-term financing mechanism.
Okay. Yeah, just to kind of again go back to what we were talking about before. This is from Lee. He says, to determine the best place to live, financially speaking, you need to consider all the costs associated with each state: housing costs, income tax, sales tax, property taxes. So maybe you want to comment on how the program evaluates taxes based on different states.
Yeah, so we program in very fine detail. There are 42 states, including District of Columbia, that have income taxes, and we program all the provisions of the state income taxes. And as I said, all the features of them, you know, we're going right through their in effect their tax, you know, return line by line. And what the program is not doing is looking at sales taxes. So the comparison I made in this talk was between the couple staying in Oregon versus moving to New Hampshire. In both states, the sales tax is zero. So you probably want to adjust if they're moving to a state where there's a differential sales tax. You'd want to, let's say, the sales tax was 2% higher in the state that they were moving into. Then you'd want to divide the present value of remaining lifetime spending in that alternative state that they might move to by 1.02 to adjust for the sales tax. That's assuming that everything that people buy is actually subject to tax. A lot of states have sales taxes where they exempt certain things like food and some basics. So you'd have to look kind of carefully at the sales tax in the different states. But otherwise, this is a full, complete, detailed comparison of living in one state versus another. And it's not just living there for this year, which is what you find in calculators that talk to you about the advantage of moving to this state versus that state. Where's a low cost state or where's a low cost city? This is looking at living in a different place for the rest of your life. Or if you want to tell the program, hey, I'm going to live in New Hampshire for 10 years, and I'm going to move to Wyoming for 20 years, and then after that, I'm going to move to Colorado. You can do that. You can tell the program you're going to move your house 2 times. You can also change vacation houses twice. So the program is highly detailed, and it and certainly, you know, you also mentioned in your question thinking about if I move to a different state or just even within the state, if I buy a specific house, it's going to, you know, I've got to be able to enter the value of that house, how much it's going to cost, and the down payment, what I'm thinking about putting down, and the mortgage rate I'm going to have to pay, and the property taxes in that new house, and the insurance, and the maintenance. Well, those are all inputs that we ask you to provide. So we're doing this really carefully. And when I talked about Joe and Jane downsizing or moving to a different state, I incorporated all those things. Next question.
Okay. This is from Terry. Yes. How is real estate inflation addressed? Housing values might inflate higher than projected savings. Might housing inflation exceed overall inflation?
It might, and we allow you to tell the program that you think your house value will appreciate at a faster rate. Let me just bring that up here, show you where you enter that in the field. So under housing, going back here to housing, see it right here, it says real appreciation rate. So I've left it at 0, but if you think that your house is going to grow at 1% faster than the general price level, you would put it in 1% here. And so we certainly take that into account. Also, if you're entering real estate, property that you might own, we also asked you about whether the price of your real estate property, maybe you own land, for example, will that appreciate faster than inflation? So the answer is we handle that.
Right. And in the, I mean, this is a sort of, follow up to that. This comes from Laurel. In the scenario where you're looking at rent, did you calculate rent increases over lifetime? At what average do these increases happen per year? Or if you didn't, how can you account for that increases in rent?
Yeah, so good question, Laurel. What we do when somebody's renting is we just ask for the current rent. We assume that it's going to keep pace with inflation. So if you say the rent is $2,000 a month, we assume, the program is assuming that that's going to rise through time at the same inflation rate as you assume under settings and assumptions, which is right here. If you click on, settings and assumptions, you see the inflation rate is at this default value. You can change it, but it's 1.5%. So we're assuming that the nominal rent is going to grow at 1.5%. But we don't actually have an input for rents rising more rapidly than inflation. That's a good thing for us to add. But you could certainly add a special expenditure, which is just the increase in, you could just tell rather than putting in anything in housing about renting, you could just enter a special expenditure which is your rent, and there you can grow that special expenditure at any rate you want. So you can grow it at faster than the specified inflation rate. So there's an easy workaround to deal with the concern. You might think the rents are going to, be stable, keep up with inflation for 5 years, but then they're going to bump up by 20%, and you want to model that. We'll just use special expenditures for that, and just treat them as non-tax related special expenditures because there's no tax break to paying rent. Okay.
So going back to the idea of pulling money out of the 401k, this is from Michael. How do you model pulling out the money from the 401k? He says the tool only seems to allow a level amount to be taken out over a specified time frame, not lump sums.
Well, you can specify that under special withdrawals here that I'm showing you that you could say, an amount this year that's going to continue for, here you make it starts 2020 and you could have it end in 2020. So that would be in effect a lump sum. You could specify, $100,000 withdrawal this year. That's how you do it right there. And you click on save and you'd save it. So what we don't have is a facility right now to have multiple, and we will add this at some point, different levels of special withdrawals in different years. We haven't programmed that yet, but we will get to that in a future update or upgrade to the program. So next question.
Yeah. Are there ways for the community, this is from Daniele, I think, are there ways for this program to account for community building, repairing gentrification, and racially disparate inherited wealth? Doesn't seem like it.
Well, I mean, one of the inputs here for the household is special receipts. So if you might be in a group, you might have parents, you might be in an ethnic group where parents don't live as long as some other ethnic group. Their longevity is not as long, and you can specify that you expect an inheritance starting, you expect to receive an inheritance. Put in inheritance. You say it's not taxable. You say it's not not taxable, and you'd say the amount. Maybe it's $25,000, and it's going to happen in 2027, and it's going to end in 2027. Now you've entered the inheritance that you think you'll get, and that might be happening earlier than if your parent or grandparent was, in a different group and had a different mortality prospects going forward. So that's the sense in which I see an interaction between race and inputs to the program and inheritance. But maybe there's, I don't know, do you think I got to the answer there, Alex, or approach the question?
I think there's a, well, I think I would say that maybe if not, you can always email me at alex@economicsecurityplanning.com. I think for big broad questions, even, and niche questions, sometimes email is even more effective at communicating. But yeah, so feel free to email me at any time.
I do want to say one other thing about we're using this that may be of interest to the questioner. We are using our tool in conjunction with in collaboration with the Atlanta Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, as a research tool where we're studying the tax treatment of poor, rich, middle-class people of different ages. And we haven't kind of drilled down to different ethnic groups, but we have certainly been focused on not just, we've been focused on inequality and remaining lifetime spending. We've been focused on progressivity of the fiscal system, and we've been focused on disincentives to work. And we found, for example, that if you look at the poorest 20% of, let's say, 40-year-olds, the poorest 20%, about a quarter within that group, about a quarter of them are facing marginal taxes on working of 70% or higher. So they're being in effect kind of locked into poverty because the federal government, in conjunction with state governments, is saying, look, if you earn more money, if you earn $1 more, you're going to lose 70 cents in extra taxes and lower benefits. And so that's the kind of analysis we're doing. And if you want to see, though, that research, if you just go to kotlikoff.net and you click on articles right here, you'll see a couple of papers under articles that, let's see, where is this? Yeah, here's the paper on marginal net taxation in America's labor supply. And there's another paper here about U.S. inequality and fiscal progressivity. So just look up in here, the top of this list of articles, you'll find two detailed papers, both of which are relying on this program, fundamentally on Maxify. But they incorporate all these tax and benefit programs that we have throughout the country. I mean, and because I say throughout the country because every state has different, like food stamp programs and different Obamacare provision, subsidies because the cost of Obamacare is different, and they have different taxes potentially, and everything is, Medicaid is different. Levels of Medicaid benefits are different in different states. The provisions of how much you can earn before you lose your Medicaid, all that is taken into account in these studies. Anyway, let's go to the next question.
Okay, this is from Bob. It says, for a retired couple with no mortgages on the house they own, how can one evaluate the financial aspects of taking out a mortgage to buy a nominal annuity? This is one of the suggestions that I guess you've been mentioning as an inflation hedge. Maybe you want to just expand on that?
Yeah, just give me that one more time. I wasn't paying enough attention to that question. Just say it again.
For a retired couple with no mortgage on the house they own, how can one evaluate the financial aspects of taking out a mortgage to buy a nominal annuity?
Okay, that's a good question. I mean, suppose you had like a 401k, and you're thinking about annuitizing it, but you can't get an inflation-protected annuity because they don't exist, and Fidelity won't give it to you. TIA, if you're part of that system, they won't give it to you. T. Rowe Price, nobody's selling Vanguard inflation-indexed annuities. So all you can buy is a nominal annuity, and inflation could take off, and you could end up getting paid back something that's not going to buy bupkis, anything really in real terms. So what you could do is you could say, gee, I've got this house. I want to buy this annuity, but I want to be protected against inflation. So here's an idea, and you can check it out in the software. You could borrow on your house and use the money to buy inflation index bonds, which unfortunately right now are yielding this negative 34 percentage point long-term return over 30 years. But that process of taking out a mortgage and then using the money to investing that the money you get from taking out a mortgage in something that's inflation protected, inflation invariant to inflation, well, now you have a hedge against your nominal annuity, because if inflation takes off, your nominal annuity from your 401k that let's say you buy a nominal annuity with your 401k balance, and then inflation takes off, well, the real payments on your mortgage go down at the same time as the real payments on your nominal annuity go down. So that's a hedge. And there's a column also at kotlikov.net that I wrote under columns. It's called Creating Your Own Inflation Protected Annuity, which talks about this very issue and uses the software to think about this. Actually, the column is based on one of our customers who said he wanted to try and buy an annuity. He's exactly in this kind of position. And he wanted to figure out how to do it in a way that was immune to inflation. So you'll see in reading this article how this can be done, but you also have to think about the cost of doing it, because the real return on, the mortgage interest rate is high, and the return on these inflation protected bonds is negative. So this may be more expensive. This might be extremely expensive protection against inflation. It may not be something in the end you want to take on. It's just like saying, well, look, I really need insurance, but for this particular possibility, earthquake insurance, let's say, but it's so expensive I can't conceive of buying it, so I'm not going to buy it. I'm just going to have to bear the risk, and that may be the case here too. But I do want to emphasize, as an economist, that who's looked at our fiscal situation and the fact that we're running enormous deficits right now, and we have all these off-the-book liabilities that we can't pay. Social Security is $53 trillion in the red, according to the Social Security Administration and its trustees report, and Medicare is in terrible long-term shape. The country is really broke, and all we see going on right now is the Fed printing money, basically, and the Treasury borrowing money. So I would be very concerned about inflation going forward. So I would not be investing in something, either an annuity that's not inflation protected in some manner, or a long-term nominal bond. That's my personal view. I'm not a investment advisor. I'm not a registered anything. That's just my 2 cents as an economist. Anyway, Alex, next question.
This is from John. He says, how does Maxify account for income tax breaks, say, for veterans?
For veterans. So we don't have any place where you can specify I don't think we've coded up any tax breaks for veterans. So if we did, we would have an input where we would ask you under settings and assumptions about whether you are a veteran and so we haven't coded that up. But what you could do is try and understand with your tax accountant or on your own, maybe using TurboTax, how big that tax break is, and put that in as a non-tax related special receipt. And if you think you're going to get this tax break for the next, 50 years, or you just enter that as an ongoing special receipt, and you specify the amount by which, your taxes will be lower relative to what we would otherwise calculate because you have this veteran status. So next question, Alex.
This is from Peter, and it kind of is about what you were talking about at the beginning of the presentation. It says for break-even rent comparison, isn't there a difference in lifetime net worth? With home ownership, Maxify models them dying with their house as an asset. Renting, they have zero net worth at death.
Yeah, renting is a in the comparison I made where I found the break-even rent, I have their house value being trapped, even though I think the slide says tapped, but it should say trapped. Another typo. But so I was comparing, they're staying in their house with their $700,000 value of their house being trapped. They can't sell it before they die. They're not using one of those 7 mechanisms to untrap it, compared to renting. So renting does have this advantage of not having any trapped equity. So, and that's that's one of my 7 options. I said, if you sell your house and you rent, then that's a way of getting out from under, untrapping this house value. But of course, the rents could rise through time. Whereas if you're sitting in a house and the house prices go up or down, or rents go up and down, you're just sitting in the house and that's not affecting you at all. So imagine you have no kids to leave your house to, and you just sit in your house and you die living, with your house, and it goes to the state or whatever. You never get to sell it. Well, you're really immune. It's really like a real annuity. You're getting housing services from your house in real terms that just continue as you continue to live. And that's one real annuity that we have with housing. You don't have to worry about the price of housing changing, because you're just sitting in your house. Whatever's going on outside, into the value of it doesn't matter. You're going to sit it in this year and next year, and as long as you live. And so that's kind of putting a floor to, guaranteeing your housing consumption stream, and that's an advantage of housing that goes in addition really to the tax advantage. It's really kind of giving you a real annuity. So anyway, I'm not sure. I think I may have wandered off the question, but
and I was saying that I thought that was a decent response to the question, and I'm trying to find a good one here for the next one.
This is a high praise from your son. So
yeah. Well, rare praise.
Yeah.
This is a question that's come up a couple times. It's from Glenn. He says, how do I see which accounts are getting withdrawn in the scenarios, Roth, IRA, or savings?
Well, in our retirement account report, we have recently upgraded. Let me go log back in here. Sorry. I got to log back in. Sorry. I'll show you the report has a column for Roth accounts. So I'll just run the base report. So you run the report, and you go over here to let's see, income. You look, under, this might not be the best title, but anyway, you look under retirement accounts, and you see Roth contributions, Roth withdrawals, and non-Roth withdrawals, Roth withdrawals, Roth assets, non-Roth assets. So It's all right here in this retirement account report. And in this case, they don't have any Roth money. So go ahead, Alex.
Okay. This is from Randall. Yes, shouldn't the decision to prepay one's mortgage, say 3.5%, more realistically be compared to the average retiree's balanced investment portfolio, say 50% equities, 50% bonds return, uh, likely 4.4 to 5% over time, as opposed to the Treasury bond rate of 1.5%?
So Randall, you need to, since those returns of a mixed portfolio, balanced portfolio like that aren't safe, even though it's balanced, diversified to some extent, you could do poorly on both the stock part of that portfolio. The stock market could drop dramatically. A lot of people think it's overvalued. It was overvalued before COVID. It's really back to kind of the value. It went down, then came back up. It's not very much below where it was before COVID hit. And a lot of people thought it was overvalued then, and we're now kind of in a major recession, if not depression. So it could drop a long way, and then inflation could also take off, in which case the bond market could really crash. So you could lose on both parts of that balanced portfolio. It's not safe. So when you adjust for risk, what the market is saying is that adjustment brings you down to 1.5% nominal return on Treasury bonds. The market thinks that that's the safe nominal return that you can get for sure, because we don't think the U.S. government is going to default on Treasury bonds. And so what I'm saying is you can't really compare 3.5% mortgage, which is a safe obligation, that's a for sure obligation, with earning 4.5% or something on a balanced portfolio, because the balanced portfolio return is not for sure. The 4.5% is not for sure. Once you risk adjusted, you're down to 1.5%. So it really is a comparison of 3.5% as a borrowing rate against 1.5% as a lending rate. And that's a big differential. That's 2 percentage points that you can arbitrage by paying off your mortgage early or in one fell swoop.
So, I'll ask this. I'll repeat this comment from Jeff to just challenge you a little bit more on this. It says there is always risk in the 6% and has been for 80 years, over which it has been calculated. But over a 20 to 40 year time horizon, a person invested only in T-bills will be in trouble and has a zero risk tolerance. How would you respond to that?
Well, there is risk, but there's always been risk. But when you have something, when you have an apple that you can buy for $2 and sell for $10, you want to do that arbitrage. And what we have here is the opportunity to do an arbitrage. If you're holding any bonds whatsoever in your portfolio, and you're talking about holding a mixed portfolio, then you're talking about getting a very low rate of return after a risk adjustment on those bonds, unless you've got junk bonds. But even risk adjust them, and you're down 1.5%. But meanwhile, you're paying 3.5% on this obligation. So there's 2 percentage points to be arbitrage opportunity. So you want to take any out. You want to buy that apple for $2, sell it for $10, and then you pocket the $8, and then figure out whether you want to invest the $8 in the stock market or in the bond market or under the pillow. But you don't want to leave the $8 on the table. You don't want it just sitting there and not take advantage of the $8 that you can pick up at no cost, basically. So I would say do everything that's safe, and then you say, well, okay, now I've paid off this mortgage, which is at a high rate. I'm not paying an excessive charge because people don't think I'm going to that I'm credit worthy, and they're charging me 3.5% when they're certainly going to get repaid. So I've beat that game that they're playing. The banks are playing with me, and now I've got no mortgage, and I still have some money left over because I paid off my mortgage, but I still have some money left over, and now I want to decide how to invest it. And I'm going to have to invest it at risk because there aren't many options that aren't risky. There's no option that's any good that's not risky right now. But so I'm going to run Maxify, and I'm going to run it in the risk analysis report and say, here's how I'm going to allocate my portfolio. I'm going to look at all the 500 trajectories that the Monte Carlo report produces, the upside and the downside to your living standard, and see what makes sense in terms of how much risk I can tolerate, how should I be investing. And that's what the whole risk analysis report, and we have a webinar posted at maxify.com//webinars all about risk analysis. So that's what I would do. I would take advantage of buying the Apple at $2, selling it for $10, pocket the $8, and then if you're going to be investing at risk, which you kind of have to do these days, look at how much risk you want to take. I mean, do you want to invest, how much you want to keep like in cash versus the stock market, given your degree of risk tolerance, which is something that the risk analysis asked you about.
Okay, so questions are kind of slowing down here. I don't know how much longer you want to go for.
Well, why don't we take a couple more questions and then give people, how many people we have on the phone, on the call?
We still have about 330 people, which is pretty good.
That's pretty good. So you folks are, if you have some more questions, fire away, send them to Alex. I can stay, why don't we say, let's go for another 15 minutes. If we have 300 people, they probably have some questions or are interested in the other people's questions. So let's see, if we run out of questions, we'll just stop, okay? But otherwise,
okay.
We'll go on till 3.
All right.
Until
okay,
4.
Yes. Yeah. All right, 15 more minutes. Okay. Well, so, and there's lots of, the questions have been pretty eclectic today because we seem to have a diversity in people of different ages, which is pretty cool to see younger people like myself interested in the webinars and in the program. Here's a question from Megan. She asked, can the program take into account student loan forgiveness in calculating whether one should make student loan payments as quick as possible or paying as based on income for 10 years?
Yeah, you can model that with, so your repayment of your student loan, you would enter as a special expense. And so you set up one profile, base profile, where you're paying back based on your current arrangements with your student loan, and then set up an alternative profile where you say, well, if I refinance my loan, or I get my, if I refinance it with this offer that's being provided to me with some forgiveness, how much better off will I be in terms of my just lifetime discretionary spending? And you see right away whether this is a good thing for you in terms of your bottom line, which is how much you get to spend after you pay off this loan. And generally speaking, these loans interest rates are around 7-8% nominal, when you can only earn 1.5% nominal, and that's if you invest long term at significant inflation risk. So by all means, if you can come up with a way of paying your, you definitely want to look at the issue of your student loans and how best to handle them in our program. Now, clearly, paying off those student loans earlier is kind of what I'm advocating, because I'm saying, look, this is a really great investment to pay off your any debt that has an above market interest rate that they're charging you. You want to pay it off. That's a fantastic investment, but you may not have the cash flow to do it. However, your parents may, or your uncle may. They may be able to give you the money to pay off your student loan, and you can pay them back not at 7 or 8%, but at 3%, and they can otherwise earn 1.5%. So they make something positive out of this. You make something. You get out from under this exorbitant interest rate that you have to pay, and that's a way for you to kind of alleviate your cash flow problem that you might have. And our program, let's say you don't have your uncle or your parents to do that deal with, or a friend or somebody who's rich, and you're just kind of stuck thinking about how much you're going to have if you do pay back your student loan more rapidly, how much you're going to have left to spend. Well, our program is ideal for looking at that, because it shows you not just your lifetime spending, but your annual spending. What are you going to get to spend every year? And it's right here in this report that I'll show you a picture. Here's your, in this case, this particular household, Joe and Jane, have a smooth annual living standard, discretionary spending $73,000 every year. But if they were borrowing constrained, this orange line would be down, would be low for a while and then higher. And that would reflect the cash flow constraints, because the program is smoothing the household's living standard, would be smoothing your living standard to the extent that we don't put you into further debt. So if you were to take a lot of money, or take, try and pay off a lot of your student loans right away, we wouldn't let you borrow more money to do that. We would just have to, we would tell you, the program would say you have to cut your spending in the short run, and your living standard will be lower for a while. And then when you get out from under, after a bit, you'd be able to spend at a higher level. But in the short run, you'd be cash constrained, as we would call it. So this program deals with, can deal with student loans better than anything in the world, and it should definitely be used by you. And just set up alternative profiles, special expenditures, and incorporates the cash flow constraints, and you really will be able to get to see everything that you need to look at.
And so on the other side of the sort of age spectrum here, even though I know that there's some even older doctors or middle-aged doctors that have a lot in student loans, but this is a question having to do with long-term care. It's from Dan. He asks, can you comment on a strategy of using home equity as an alternative to long-term care insurance, and the best way to use home equity for that need should it arise?
Yeah, the way I would model this in the program is I'd set up one kind of maybe a base case where you do not buy long-term care insurance, but you specify a nursing home period of time where you have to be in a nursing home, and you treat that as a special expense. You say, okay, between 85 and 100 maybe, I'm thinking about being in a nursing home or having to have out-of-pocket medical expenses, which are $50,000 a year, for example. So and then you look at your lifetime discretionary spending under that scenario, under the base case. And then you set up an alternative profile where you have the same out-of-pocket expenses, the same medical costs late in life, but you also enter a special expenditure for paying for the premium for this policy through time. But then you also enter a special receipt, which is the payoff of the policy when this, when you become ill under this scenario and you need to be in a facility or need to have home health care, you enter that as a special receipt. And then you see, well, gee, the base case has no insurance. The new case has insurance. Which one has the highest lifetime discretionary spending? And that gives you an idea of whether this insurance is too expensive relative to kind of self-insuring by just not buying the insurance, not paying the premium, but it could be you're holding on to your house. I mean, the scenario could be that at the point where the base case could be that at the point where you have to go into a facility where you have this medical, that you downsize at that point. You sell your house and you either rent if you're going to stay out of a facility, or you sell your house and then you buy into a facility. So you can model using your house equity, house value to cover this out-of-pocket expense that's going to be coming under that scenario. So that's how I would run the comparison.
Okay. Let's see. This is from Cynthia. How would you model the benefit of paying off the mortgage on the rental property?
On the rental property. Well,
Yeah.
So it's really very much like you model paying off the. You could just go into the real estate and you could specify a smaller mortgage because you're going to, let's say, right today pay off a chunk of that mortgage, and then you'd specify lower, payments in the real estate part of the program. But then you'd also have less. Let's suppose you had regular assets of $300,000, and you're thinking about taking $200,000 to pay off a mortgage on an apartment that you own. Well, okay, so you say so you run that as an alternative profile relative to the base case. And in that alternative profile, you specify that you have $200,000 less in regular assets and that you have a mortgage on that real estate that's $200,000 smaller, because we're talking here about you're taking the 200,000 of your 300,000 and immediately paying off that, paying down that mortgage. And then you run that scenario and you see what happens to your lifetime discretionary spending. And I'm sure if it's a real estate property, the mortgage rate is probably pretty high. And the program is assuming you're only going to earn 1.5% for sure nominal. So it'll show up as improving your lifetime discretionary spending as a win to do this, because any mortgage is charging, any consumer loan of any kind is charging a higher rate than you can earn safely as a lender. So as I said earlier, paying off mortgages, paying off student loans, paying off car loans, paying off credit cards, whatever is the highest interest rate debt you have, pay that one off first, and go down the line to the lower interest rate charging debts, but pay those off because that's your best investment. That's a perfectly safe return, and it's a high return, and that's what you really want to focus on, trying to get that. It's just the best investment in the world for people in that situation.
Okay, so we have 5 more minutes here about, there's a question from Randall. I'll try to answer it because I think it's pretty easy. He asks, can the program calculate the financial benefit or not of doing a Roth conversion? And the answer is yes. We've looked at this in our in previous webinars, and you can go to our website, maxifyplanner.com/webinars. You can see our recordings on this. So yeah, it's absolutely. Here's a good question from Stephen here. So he says, so let's. Yeah.
If Randall's still on the call, just pointing out where you can enter. Oh, it logged me out, but there's a place. They're just pointing to the place where you can put in the Roth conversion. Anyway,
right, exactly. Right. Yeah. But just in the interest of time, I wanted to just go on to this next question here by Stephen. He says, so let's push a little on the original scenario. Joe dies and Jane is a widow. The house is paid off, but Jane now has run out of savings and is living on Social Security and a small military survivor's pension. She wants to stay in her house, but understands that reverse mortgages are too expensive. Does she have any other options?
Well, first of all, the program is recommending life insurance where needed. So if Joe has, let's say, maybe if Jane was not working or had a low salary, let's say 25,000, and Joe was making more like 175,000, and he dies, the program knows to look at that possibility that he could die in every future year, and it figures out how much life insurance he needs to have in every future year to make sure that Jane has to the dollar the same living standard. I'm going to just show you by running this real quick. So the program is, if you follow the program's recommendations on life insurance, which are right here, you can look at the table, the numbers, or how much coverage they should both have each year, and the premium payments that we estimate they'd have to pay. But you can see that the program is incorporating life insurance. So Jane probably, if you followed these recommendations, she probably would not end up bereft. But if she were bereft and she did have, if he, let's say, hadn't bought the life insurance and he dies and she has a house, then I think the best thing to do would be to downsize it and invest. Question is how should she invest the proceeds? Well, she would downsize and pay off the mortgage would be the best way to use the proceeds. To try and get into another house without a mortgage, that would be her best move in terms of an investment. Try and have as less a small a mortgage as possible, and otherwise, unfortunately, you can't invest in these inflation index bonds that are out there yielding a negative return. So there's nothing really great to invest in that's safe. It's really safe against inflation.
So we have one more minute here, so maybe let's just do one more question.
Sure.
How does that sound? Okay. I like this question because I live in California and been experiencing, as everyone knows, terrible fires, and actually basically escaped to the East Coast where I'm from originally for a month. This is from Rita. She says, given the recent climate issues, fires, floods, hurricanes, etc., that are now serious issues, do you or will your program look at various states in regards to how risky they are to live in
now? Yeah. I think that goes to the question of obviously there's personal risk of getting caught in a fire or getting, being in an earthquake or getting hit by a hurricane. But I think your question is really going to the risk of your house value dropping. And what our software does right now is it looks at your financial assets, your stocks and bonds, and any financial security. And in its risk analysis, it looks at, you're investing in those things, and the return could be high, it could be negative, and looks at all the possible outcomes and gives you a sense of the variability of your living standard and how you should diversify your portfolio. But what it doesn't do is take into account the fact that your house price could drop dramatically because fire breaks out in your area, and even though you might have, let's say your house doesn't burn down, nobody wants to buy your house anymore because it's in a risky area. So I think we need to, through time, incorporate house price variability uncertainty. We also have in mind to incorporate uncertainty about inflation in our risk analysis. So and we also would like to incorporate even uncertainty about people's future labor income. So we have a lot on our plate. We've come a long way in the 27 years we've developed the software. It's really able to, as you can see from today's talk, handle a whole slew of important questions, but it doesn't handle everything yet. But we've only been at this for 27 years and we're just getting going. So keep an eye on how we're doing, and bug us if we're not moving quick enough for an issue that you're concerned about. But we are sensitive to understanding that there are things that this program, as thorough as it is, doesn't incorporate yet and needs to. So we're going to continue to try and improve it and expand it. So I want to thank everybody for coming and listening to this. We'll be sending you an email link to the slides for this. So thanks again, Alex. Any parting comments?
No, I just want to say thanks, everyone. And just as a reminder, we will be sending out the recording and the slides over the next few days. So thanks, everyone.